There's a specific kind of late-night moment that crosses a line most hosts spend their careers carefully staying behind. Not the line of taste or decorum, though those lines exist and occasionally matter. The line between comfortable, broadly relatable comedy and something sharper. Something with a target clearly identified, a sustained aim, and no exit ramp built into delivery. The kind of segment where the host finishes one joke, pauses for exactly the right amount of time, and then loads the next one without changing the angle. Jimmy Fallon, a man whose brand has been built over more than a decade on warmth, accessibility, and a specific talent of making every guest feel like the most interesting person in the room, sat down behind his desk, looked into the camera, and spent several uninterrupted minutes doing something that felt genuinely different from anything he had done before. He went after one target. He did not slow down. He did not balance the blows. He did not pivot to something lighter when the crowd needed to breathe, and what he said and how he said it and the way the audience reacted ended up being the story the next morning. He opened on Iran. Trump had announced publicly that he would review a new 14-point peace proposal submitted by Iranian officials. He had also announced, in roughly the same breath, that he could not imagine the proposal would be acceptable. Fallon framed the contradiction with the specific precision of someone who has been watching a particular kind of behavior long enough to know exactly which angle makes it most visible. Nothing says diplomacy, he said, like saying no before you've opened the file. The laugh was immediate and large, not because the joke was especially complex, but because the observation was so clean. The humor was already fully contained in the original statement. Fallon had simply placed it in the right light and let the audience see it clearly. This is a particular skill that separates effective political comedy from simple commentary. Anyone can describe what happened. The comedian's job is to identify the one angle from which the absurdity is most visible, frame it in the fewest possible words, and trust the audience to cover the remaining distance on their own. Fallon had identified that angle in the first 30 seconds and had not moved from it for the rest of the segment. The Strait of Hormuz announcement arrived next. Trump had stated that the United States would begin escorting commercial vessels through the strait, a military and logistical operation with serious geopolitical implications that policy experts had spent considerable time debating in measured language across a variety of platforms. Fallon reduced it to a single sentence. Best case scenario when you hear Trump announcing an escort service, he said. The construction was simple. The misdirection was clean. The audience arrived at the punchline a fraction of a second before he completed the sentence, which is the ideal timing because it makes the laugh feel like recognition rather than response. You are laughing at something you figured out rather than something you were told, which produces a different quality of engagement and a more sustained reaction. What Fallon was doing underneath the joke, though, was something slightly more serious than the wordplay suggested. He was pointing at the specific quality of Trump-era governance announcements where policy decisions of genuine consequence arrive wrapped in language and framing so casual and imprecise that they become indistinguishable stylistically from the kind of statement someone makes at a press conference for a minor product launch. The tone does not match the gravity. The presentation does not match the stakes. And once you notice that mismatch, it is almost impossible to take the presentation seriously again without the mismatch inserting itself between you and the content. Fallon's joke was the mismatch, stated directly, with a wordplay wrapper that made it land as comedy rather than criticism, but carrying the criticism fully intact underneath the surface. The AI image sequence was where the segment moved into territory that felt genuinely new. Trump had posted an AI-generated image of himself playing Uno. The caption read, "I have all the cards." Fallon let the image sit on screen for a moment longer than necessary, the specific length of time that signals to an audience that you are giving them permission to fully absorb what they are looking at before anyone tells them what to think about it. He said nothing immediately. Then he said something simple about the gap between the intended message of dominance and strategic mastery and the actual visual of a digitally generated version of the president sitting at a card game with an expression designed by an algorithm. The joke itself was less significant than what it revealed, because the AI image and the caption were, structurally, an argument, a claim about power and control and strategic positioning. And Fallon was pointing at the gap between the scale of the claim and the vehicle chosen to deliver it, a children's card game, with fake cards, in a fake room, with a fake version of the person making the argument. At some point in the past decade, the line between earnest political communication and something that could only be interpreted as parody by anyone examining it from outside a specific frame of reference collapsed. Fallon was not making that observation abstractly. He was pointing at a single specific post that illustrated it completely, and letting the audience draw the larger conclusion from the specific example. The White House security joke arrived with the specific quality of Fallon bit that works through the unexpectedness of its proposed solution rather than through analysis of the original problem. He acknowledged that the security situation at the White House Correspondents' Dinner had become a major topic of conversation. Everyone was safe. The incident had been reviewed, and the proposed solution, as Fallon framed it, was to secure the president the way CVS secures its deodorant, behind a lock case, available on request. The image is ridiculous on its face, which is the point. The CVS deodorant lock is itself a kind of commentary, a retail solution to a retail problem that exists because a certain category of item keeps disappearing from shelves. Applying that framework to presidential security collapses the implied dignity of the office into something that sounds like a conversation between a shift manager and a loss prevention consultant. Fallon was not actually proposing a security solution. He was using the absurd image to highlight the specific absurdity of a situation in which the security apparatus surrounding the most protected position in American government had become the subject of genuine concern and public debate. The joke worked because the proposed solution matched the scale of the problem as it currently appeared, not the scale the position was supposed to require. The Marco Rubio as Baby Yoda observation was one of the shorter bits in the segment and worked precisely because of its brevity. Fallon said Trump had made Rubio dress as Baby Yoda. He paused. He said he thought that was cute. The pause carried everything. The word cute carried everything. The joke did not need development or explanation or follow-up because the image was already doing the full weight of comedic work. A former presidential candidate, current Secretary of State, in a costume at the White House on Star Wars Day. The fact that Fallon said he thought it was cute rather than offering any analysis or criticism was itself the sharpest possible response. Genuine absurdity does not require a comedian to explain why it is absurd. The best response is often simply to observe it with a tone that acknowledges the observation is sufficient. He followed it immediately with the Spirit Airlines out of business we are announcement, which worked in a similar register. The real-world event was already so perfectly structured as a joke that the comedian's only contribution was to read it in the right tone with the right timing. The material had written itself. Fallon's job was only to show up and deliver it straight. The astronaut sequence produced one of the sharper images of the night. Trump had hosted the astronauts at the White House. Fallon imagined a moment when Trump asked them what space felt like and suggested their answer was a single word: peaceful. The laugh was large and immediate, but the reason it landed so hard was not the punchline itself. It was the implication underneath the punchline that the word peaceful carried specific meaning in that specific context, that the astronauts, having spent time in an environment defined by silence and distance and a complete absence of earthly noise, might have a particular emotional relationship with that word when asked a question inside the White House. Fallon was not making a complex argument. He was constructing a specific image and letting the audience complete it. Two astronauts who had been to space. One question from the host of the building. One word answer. The gap between the question's intended meaning and the answer's actual implication carrying the full weight of the joke without being stated directly. The King Charles material brought the segment into international territory, and the tone shifted slightly without losing its momentum. Fallon imagined Trump arriving at a royalty carrying golf clubs and asking the king if he knew Harry Potter. The joke works on multiple levels simultaneously. The golf clubs as Trump's constant companion. President photographs and conversations and controversies across both presidencies, functioning as a kind of shorthand for his priorities and preferences even in settings where their presence is contextually incongruous. The Harry Potter reference suggesting a framework for understanding British culture that could be generously described as approximate, both details arriving together in a single image of a man being received by a centuries-old monarchy while carrying the specific accessories and assumptions of a different kind of lifestyle entirely. The Putin phone call sequence pushes further. Fallon imagined Putin using a call with the American president to ask gossipy questions about the royal family. What are they really like? Is it awkward? Do they like him? The image reduced two of the most consequential geopolitical relationships of the current era to something resembling a conversation between two people in high school who have heard about a party and are comparing notes. The comedy was not in the characters. It was in the scale reduction, taking the largest possible stage and making it small. The Trump as movie star observation was the most sustained of the segment's analytical moments. Fallon made the point that Trump had moved beyond seeing himself as a politician or even as a television personality. The framework he appeared to be operating within was something closer to the leading role in production, where every press conference is a scene, every announcement is a plot development, and every controversy is designed to keep the audience watching rather than to resolve any underlying issue. Fallon described this not as a critique of specific policies, but as an observation about how the relationship between governance and entertainment had been restructured over a decade until the two were no longer separable. Every headline somehow becomes stranger than the last. Every announcement sounds like a punchline before the comedians touch it. The production value of political communication has been optimized not for clarity or accuracy, but for the specific qualities that make something shareable and discussable and impossible to ignore. He doesn't enter rooms anymore, Fallon said. He enters headlines. The line worked because it was structurally true. The entrance is constructed before the physical arrival. The narrative is established before the door opens. The coverage is anticipated and prepared for. What happens in a room is secondary to what the room will mean once it has been processed through the coverage cycle and delivered to the people who were not there. What made the segment land as something beyond a standard collection of political jokes was the cumulative effect of its structure. Fallon did not change targets. He did not rotate through topics to maintain the traditional monologue variety that late-night segments usually require to sustain energy. He stayed on one subject, approached it from different angles, and let each new joke build on the foundation of the ones that came before. By the time he reached the final observation, the audience had been moving in one direction for several minutes, and the momentum was his entirely. He said America no longer waits for political updates. People wait for the next episode. The line sent the room into the specific kind of chaos that arrives when a joke lands so precisely on a truth that the audience cannot fully separate the laughter from the recognition. The laugh and the nod arrive at the same time. The comedy and the observation are not distinguishable from each other. The episode framing was precise because it identified the structural shift accurately. An episode has a previous installment and a next one. It has characters whose behavior across episodes creates expectations. It has cliffhangers that are designed to ensure the audience returns. It has a production logic that is completely separate from the logic of governance or policy or international relations. And Fallon was pointing at the moment that logic had become the dominant operating system. He wrapped the segment not with summary or a punchline or a soft exit designed to return the room to comfortable ground. He simply connected the thread that had been running through every joke and pulled it tight. Every conversation around this presidency eventually turns into confusion, drama, or a viral moment that takes over the internet within minutes, he said. And the chaos isn't a side effect of the policy decisions. The chaos is the policy. The chaos is the point. The audience did not need to be told whether to laugh or to sit with that. They did both. What happened after the segment ended is worth tracking as a separate story. The clips moved through social media the way Fallon's material had not moved in several years. Not because the jokes were technically more sophisticated than his usual work, but because they felt different in tone. The warmth that normally cushions his delivery was still present, but had been moved to a secondary position. What was primary was the accuracy, the precision, the sense of someone who had been watching something carefully for a long time and had finally decided to say clearly what he'd been observing. Viewers who had criticized Fallon in the past for not engaging more directly with political material made note of the shift. People who had appreciated the traditional late-night warmth of his approach found the harder edge jarring, but acknowledged it had landed. Both reactions were accurate descriptions of the same thing. Fallon had not abandoned his voice. He had applied it to something that required more of it than his usual targets, and the application had worked. The monologue ended the way the best ones end, not with a bow or a button or a careful exit, designed to send everyone home comfortable, with the specific feeling of something having been said that needed to be said, said in the only register that could have made it land, by the only host whose history with his audience gave him the specific credibility to be the one saying it. The episode framing stuck in the room after the cameras cut. People were still thinking about the next one,